There have been people I've met in my life who hate fantasy and sci-fi. And it kind of makes sense now. I just thought they were crazy. But maybe they're not crazy. Maybe
it's
they're
the opposite. They're not crazy.
Exactly. Oh my God, Demi, are we the crazy ones?
Welcome to the More Magic Book Club podcast, a podcast for fantasy readers dying to talk about the latest fantasy book you read and loved. Each month, we discuss a recent fantasy novel in detail, so you know you're not the only one who hated that character or wanted to move into that fantasy world. And you also don't have to worry about exhausting your friends who just don't get it. I'm your host, Demi Utley, an author and avid fantasy reader who also runs the More Magic newsletter over on Substack.
And I'm your co-host, Marianne Boules. I am a children's picture book author, corgi mother, and Brandon Sanderson fan, although we prefer to call ourselves Sandy Heads.
So excited to dive into our latest read with you and can't wait to hear what you thought. Since we're discussing the book in detail, there may be a few spoilers, so listen at your own risk. And now it's time for us to dive into this month's book. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the More Magic Book Club podcast. So today we are going to talk about fantasy subgenres. And I'm really excited to talk about this because as a reader living in our current world, sometimes I'm like, hey, I don't want to be in our current world, but I don't know what world I want to be in. And because there's so many different types of fantasy books, I don't know if you run into this, but sometimes I'm like, I want to read a fantasy book, but I don't want to read that specific kind, but I don't know what kind I want it to be. So then thinking about these different subgenres helps me to narrow it down a little bit. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, totally. And also, I think there's a lot of overlap in the genres and subgenres to the point that I feel like people get confused sometimes. So I think this would be good, a good time to get a lay of the land of fantasy and realize that fantasy is not just one big thing, but it's actually many different types of things. And sometimes we'll talk about this, but sometimes one subgenre will be so popular that it ends up almost dwarfing the entire genre. And that drives me nuts because then what ends up happening is we see less of the other subgenres because publishers might just be like, oh, like gritty fantasy is all the rage right now. Let's pump up the grid now and make everything but make it gritty, right? Like Sabrina and Archie, the Archie comics, but make it gritty. But as readers, as fantasy readers, not everyone likes gritty fantasy. I myself definitely don't, and I know you don't either. So this is also kind of like a plea, if there's any publishers listening, to just hear us out. See the different types of fantasy that are out there, and I promise you'll find people who are interested in each one.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there are other things that exist. We don't have to always focus just on the one thing. We can have other things in life too. Yeah.
Yes, it's the book version of pop songs, where it gets played again and again and again until you want to rip your hair out. For a song that you used to like, it's kind of like that, but with genres. Yeah.
Like back when everything was vampires, I was like, I don't want to read another vampire book. And now I'm like, oh, we just read a vampire book and we liked it.
Yeah, we needed a break. Yeah. There was another one. Oh, remember the zombie era? There was a romance.
Because that's when there was like The Walking Dead and all of that.
There was The Walking Dead. There was World War Z. There was even Warm Bodies, which was a zombie romance. And then there was iZombie, which was actually really good. It's probably the best zombie story out there. It's a comic book that got turned into a TV show, super underrated. But yeah, like I got tired. Oh, and then there was Zombie Land, which was also really good. You know what? Maybe I should start watching some zombie movies again. I think time has passed.
I completely missed all of those, except I saw World War Z. Because wait, that's not the Will Smith movie. What's the one I'm thinking of?
You're thinking of a classic, which is I Am Legend.
I Am Legend. World War Z had Brad Pitt in it.
Yes, and the book is 1,000 times better than the movie for anyone listening.
I know. That's what my brother has told me that a million times. And I don't think
World War Z is almost like a documentary. It's almost written like a nonfiction account of a post zombie apocalypse. I always want to bring it up on this podcast, but it's definitely in the realm of sci-fi. So I'm just going to sneak it in for today's episode. Read World War Z.
Yeah, well, maybe we should start there because that's something, because like sci-fi fantasy are always grouped together. SFF, like they're pretty much all like, I feel like every bookstore or most bookstores will have them in the same section, unless it's a bigger bookstore, then they might have a sci-fi and a fantasy section. So, I mean, this is like starting at the very basics. What are your thoughts on comparing sci-fi and fantasy? Because spoiler for everyone listening right now, we do have a category of sci-fi fantasy on our list of fantasy subgenres, which I'm actually reading a book right now that falls into that. So what do you think about that?
Okay, that's a great question. And I actually have a fully formed opinion about this, which is that there's actually more overlap than people think, especially when you get to hard magic. So
I was thinking that when I was writing the list, I was like, she's going to love this.
Yes. Like the Cosmere universe is literally a planetary system with its own set of laws, its own set of physics, its own set of like rules of thermodynamics. Like it's really not magic. It's really like the science and the natural laws of that planet and of that universe. So it's technically a fantasy because it's not rooted in I guess almost, would you say, Demi, that sci-fi, the main difference is that sci-fi is it's rooted in our world with our laws, but it's like how far can our innovations and technologies go within the boundaries of our universe, versus fantasy has elements that are outside of our universe that are like, that is completely not tied to the bounds of our universe. Is that something that you would say?
That's interesting because I've always like, a lot of times I hear like, if it's aliens, it's sci-fi, you know? But then like in Brandon Sanderson's books, it's like you could say that it's just an alien universe. And like you said, it is like this hard magic where it's like more sciencey. So it's like, is it actually sci-fi, but just like humans aren't in it, you know? That's like a more of a philosophical like question, not trying to say he's not fantasy. I think he is, but that's where I feel like it does blur the line. But to me, I feel like sci-fi is definitely kind of what you were saying. Like it's humans have to be a part of it. In my opinion, if it's just an alien world, that feels more like fantasy to me. But then also at the same time, thinking about like Avatar, thinking about that movie, that feels fantasy to me, even though it's sci-fi. Like it feels so fantastical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like something that's like classic fantasy is elements of like, we always say like classic fantasy has medieval Europe in it, like elements of medieval Europe. But sometimes like some of my favorite books are sci-fi, but with a medieval Europe twist. Like, for example, a book that I loved when I was a kid is called Enchantress from the Stars. It's like a 1970s book that I was forced to read as a punishment, quote unquote, from a teacher who didn't know that reading, I would much rather read than be in her class.
That's so funny. Oh my God. Can I get that teacher? Like the punishment is you have to go read.
Like, okay, great. Encourage me more to be disruptive. Sweet. But like that book is about medieval Earth, or even maybe ancient Earth. It's never quite made clear, but as like a alien nation comes to mine the Earth of its resources. And there's like this beautiful princess who's actually an alien who falls in love with one of the native men, which is one of the Earthlings. So it is sci-fi because it's an alien story, but from the perspective of the man, like the male main character, it's fantasy. And she's a beautiful princess who floats from the sky. And it's a giant dragon who's actually like a mining machine. But for him, it's like an evil dragon coming to set fire to the land. And so I think that's a perfect example of how sci-fi and fantasy blend in a lot more than we think. And it's really about what perspective you're looking at it from.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's almost like there's like a spectrum where at one end you have fantasy, like say Lord of the Rings, where there's sort of unexplainable magic, the magic that Gandalf does, all of this stuff, the dragons, it's set in another world. Like this is like super ultra fantasy. And then you have like sci-fi on the other side, which is like just technology, you know, like Jules Verne thinking about like going under the sea and like all of this technology, or the future world where there's like, technology with aliens and stuff. Like Guardians of the Galaxy feels like sci-fi to me. But then in between you have some that have both. And it's like, well, where do these fit? You know, because they're not our world and our like as it exists right now. But I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
And it's one last thing I'll say about this is it's also like, as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh, maybe it has to do with the spiritual aspects because Lord of the Rings is very spiritual. But one of my favorite books that I actually have on here for our science fiction fantasy category is A Wrinkle in Time, because there's aliens, but there's also angels, and it's also spiritual, but there's also like, planetary travel. So it's definitely a book that I would say falls squarely in the middle of that spectrum. So I guess, you know what, I think you just got to read it, and when you'll know.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it can be whatever it is to you. Like something to me might be fantasy because I read it and I'm like, that just feels magical. And to someone else, they'd be like, oh, but here's all the reasons why it could actually happen. So it's sci-fi, or like aliens, like, yeah, if it's a dragon, but it's an alien, which is it,
That's
yeah,
right.
That's like a good point. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
With that out of the way, let's go
that was not on my list. I was not expecting to have that discussion, but I'm glad we did because I haven't really thought about that much before. So maybe sometimes you're just in the mood for sci-fi and you think it's fantasy, but really you want a sci-fi book. So first we have high fantasy, which is what I think a lot of people think about when you think of fantasy, which is like Lord of the Rings. You're in another place and there's magic and it's just so different from ours.
Yeah, I would say high fantasy is extreme world building. I think low-key the authors who engage in high fantasies have to be kind of like mad geniuses because they're inventing a whole new world, sometimes whole new languages, whole new cultures, and not just one culture. Like the best fantasy worlds are the one where there's multiple cultures and those cultures fight with each other, and like the language is tied to the history of that culture, and you as the reader can see how, let's say, a god is named different things according to the language evolution of each culture, and you start to piece together the story of what actually happened to that god. That's just an example.
I was like, this feels very specific.
That is Brandon Sanderson. That was a Brandon Sanderson reference.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, this is moving out of theoretical into
that was a Brandon Sanderson reference for the Stormlight archive of like how every nation has a name for a god, and it's a one god. Like, and then you find out that the god is, well, you know what? I'm going to stop here because my brother tells me I have a horrible spoiler problem, and this is not a spoiler episode. But yes, and then like even just use another example, like Patrick Rothfuss, Name of the Wind. He has this nation that speaks with their hands as much as they speak with their, or like even more so than they speak with their mouths. And so there's a whole culture that evolves around that. So everything is different now because there are people who communicate with their hands. For example, even the way they eat is different. And so it's a lot of extreme world building like that, where it's not just the plot, it's everything around it too. Very immersive.
Yeah, I definitely think like the high versus low fantasy discussion to me is really about the setting. Whereas there are some others that are more about the plot or the characters, like as we talk through these different genres, because fantasy, like you said, high fantasy is that intense world building someplace else, all of these cultures and other things. But low fantasy, the opposite is here in our world and there's magic. So that's where we talked about this a little bit in a different episode. I don't remember.
Last episode.
Oh, the standalone fantasy books. Yeah, because I feel like we both read across both categories, but you gravitate more towards high fantasy. I gravitate more towards low fantasy. For me as a reader, the reason that I love low fantasy books is because it feels like it could just happen. Like I could just like encounter an actual witch or a vampire, though I'm scared of a vampire. I do not want to encounter a vampire or the zombies like we were talking about earlier. Like it feels like it could just happen. And I really like that about low fantasy. The classic thing to me is, like witches. Like I'm rewatching Charmed right now. I just watched an episode yesterday, which
does it hold up?
I feel like it does hold up. Like comparing that to something like Friends, like I feel like Friends is still funny, but some of the jokes and stuff don't land. And Charmed, I think that they've aged fairly well. So anyone, if you haven't watched Charmed, you could go watch it. It's on Peacock, actually, I think. So something like that. And then like V.E. Schwab writes a lot of low fantasy books. though she does have portal fantasy as well. So the world building is there, but it's like, I feel like most of the low fantasy novels I've read, thinking about like the cultural stuff, there'll be the culture of like, if it's creatures, for example. So maybe the witches have a different way of interacting with each other, or the vampires. Like we talked about that a little bit with Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, how they did have these kind of rules about how they interacted with each other. So there's still some of that cultural stuff, but it's, we're still on Earth.
Yeah, there's still elements of world building. And I think like a good example would be Harry Potter, because it's set in our world, but it's like a culture within our world that's hidden from us. So there's world building in that aspect. So there's still world building. It's just not like from scratch.
Yeah, which I went to a V.E. Schwab, like she went on tour, so I saw her speak, and I really liked how she talked about this. So she said, when you think of fantasy, there's like, how much can the reader handle disbelief? Like, how much can you suspend your disbelief? And so something like high fantasy, like classic high fantasy, is you have to suspend like all disbelief. You're in another place. You have to understand all of this. Magic just exists. But if it's a low fantasy, like she thinks of how many steps you have to take. So you might just take one step to say, oh, there are witches who can like brew potions. That's not that far removed from our world. We take medicine, we drink teas and stuff. That's not that hard to imagine. But the further away you get, the harder it is to believe. And I really like that kind of way of thinking about fantasy.
That is so funny. I've never thought about it that way, but that makes sense, because there have been people I've met in my life who hate fantasy and sci-fi. And it kind of makes sense now. I just thought they were crazy. But maybe they're not crazy. Maybe
it's
they're
the opposite. They're not crazy.
Exactly. Oh my God, Demi, are we the crazy ones?
Oh my God, I definitely am. I'm sorry that you just now found this out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's like, it's funny. I was actually just talking to someone the other day who I was like, oh, I write fantasy. And she's like, oh, I never really got into fantasy because she literally said, I can't suspend disbelief. And I was like, wild that you like phrase it that way. But she said she recently read Circe and loved it and is now kind of exploring fantasy. So I thought that was like just an interesting thing, because I'm like, man, I want to just believe in something else, like I
barely want to be
here. Yeah,
I want to be on another planet.
Yeah, I know. I think that's why, like, thinking of like grimdark and stuff, I'm like, ooh, I don't like that, because I don't want to. You said that last time. You're like, I judge a world based on like if I want to live in it, and I definitely do that too. It's like my favorite books are the ones where I'm like, I want this to be real. Like it is real. Like I'm just gonna say it's real, But the ones where I'm like, I hope that that's not real. Like I don't want to go read that. And currently the news is that, so it's like I'm just gonna go read fantasy.
Yeah, fantasy is way simpler. Or at least the good guys eventually win after, like, especially maybe we could get to the next category, which is epic fantasy. Where like eventually, usually the good guys win, but like after eons, or like after, they never win. It's never a small battle. It's always, a huge epoch, like high stakes values. There's traveling involved. Sometimes multiple generations will pass. It's an intense story. It's like, to me, it's probably my favorite genre. Like, because it's so intense and it tells a human story over a long period of time. Right? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that epic to me also is very plot driven. So it could be in any of the fantasy worlds. It definitely is like this like huge world changing kind of conflicts. And it's interesting because you were talking a lot about the cultural stuff. I think that thinking of epic fantasy, I feel like it's almost looking at things from that societal view. I mean, you have characters, but you're really rooted in like, we want Sauron to collapse and things like that. Would you consider Harry Potter epic? I think I would, because in the book, like Voldemort, came to power and all of that was happening way before Harry was born.
Yeah. And he totally destabilized the wizarding world. Then like Harry was a prophecy that was told, and the whole story, all seven. I mean, I feel like it was an epic. I still to this day, I remember a couple years ago, I was reading it out loud to my husband for some reason. He was like finishing it up and I started sobbing, like, because it feels so real to me. Because it's, and I think that's a hallmark of epic fantasy, is like you were there for that journey. You saw the whole thing happen. So it's like very intense when it's finally resolved. and so soothing in a weird way, knowing that the good guys eventually win, that there's justice eventually. Even if in the small minutia there is no justice, there's something very hopeful about that for me.
Yeah, it makes me think of the moment, like Lord of the Rings. I believe it's in Two Towers. There's a quote that Sam says about stories, and he's like, these are the stories that we live for. I can't quote it off the top of my head, but basically the moments where people have to like pursue and it seems everything's fallen apart, and like how can anything ever be good again? And eventually, they triumph. And I wish I could recite that quote off the top of my head because it's so good. But that is very much epic fantasy to me. And really that like going through that hard point where you're like, oh my gosh, like the forces are going to win and like everyone's going to. I feel like sometimes in non-epic fantasy, it's a battle between, maybe it's your main character and then they have a villain and it's like really about like their lives and them.
But the world continues on.
Friends. Yeah, but then in epic fantasies, if the bad guy wins, everyone suffers. It's like millions of people or creatures or beings, like whatever the world is. It has that kind of global scale. And yeah, I think that's where it's very like existential almost to read it.
It's totally, you're right. Like existential is the word. And the thing about Lord of the Rings, I just want to call it out, even though I make fun of my husband and I always fight with each other over Lord of the Rings versus Harry Potter. I'm team Harry Potter. He's team Lord of the Rings. But Lord of the Rings is the absolute pinnacle of epic fantasy, in my opinion. And it's so quotable in terms of like that existential battle of good and evil. Like the one that I always think about all the time is Frodo speaking to Gandalf saying, "I wish we never lived to see such times." And then Gandalf says, "So do all, but all we can do is decide what to do with the times that we've been given." It's so deep. It is so deep. And I think about that all the time. Like, obviously, like life is hard. Humanity is difficult. We hurt each other. Sometimes we hurt each other and it's systematic and it's big and it's evil. I obviously don't want to live through those times, but I would have rather just lived through, like, I don't know, like I can't even think of a single time where there wasn't something horrible happening. Like, there's always something going on, but like maybe like the small period between World War I and the Great Depression, like that, maybe that period seems pretty nice.
Like 1 year.
And then it all went out the door for them. But like all I can do is decide, like, okay, this is the world that we're living in. What am I going to do? Am I going to be a part of the problem or am I going to be part of the solution? And it's just, it is what it is. We're soldiers. We just got to soldier on. And so, yeah, Lord of the Rings is the best. I hope my husband's not listening. Lord of the Rings is the best when it comes to this.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are so many moments in Lord of the Rings that have that powerful feeling. So like Helm's Deep, I feel like is one that always comes up, the Battle of Helm's Deep. And, Gandalf is like, look to me on the 5th day or whatever it is. And then it seems like they're going to lose and everyone's dying. And they're like, well, we're going to go for our last victory. And then Gandalf and all the other people show up and then they win. And it's those moments where you lose hope and the scale of how much death was happening, how much pain and like the desperation, I feel is really epic. It's very classic epic fantasy. And I feel like we could just like talk about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. So I think I found something new today, which is I think epic fantasy is like my actual favorite genre.
Epic is like, there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so historical fantasy, we've kind of talked about this a little bit because I feel like some of these can be epic fantasy, but historical fantasy to me is really fantasy in historical settings. So this, I would say, is pretty much always low fantasy because it's like on our world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So some that I think about, we actually did The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. We had an episode on that. I would consider that historical fantasy.
Oh, yeah. She even went out of her way to keep it historically accurate.
Yeah, I think that was a good one. And then one that I always think about, I don't know if you've read this, but it's, I think Naomi Novik is the author. The series, I think, is called the Temeraire series. It has His Majesty Dragons. It's basically the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons. Have you read those?
No.
They're good. There's a lot of books. I think I read 8, and there might be 12 books in the series. I don't know how many there are in the series. So it's a lot, but they're good. Dragons during the Napoleonic Wars, and they're I feel like they're pretty like emotional, which I was not expecting, because it's kind of from the perspective of, I think, a naval officer, but it's like the Navy is dragons, basically.
It needs boats when you have flying reptiles.
Yeah, they might have boats too, but I'm like, it's been years since I read it. I'm like, did everyone know there were dragons, or were they secret? I don't remember exactly, but it's a fun series. You should definitely read it. And yeah, if anyone's interested in historical fantasy, I was skeptical because the pitch of dragons in the Napoleonic Wars, I was like, I don't want to read something about war, but it's good. It kind of reminds me of like Aragon and all of those books, obviously because of dragons. But also it wasn't like it was just always battles. There were times where they would travel to go somewhere, and like, so you saw the relationship between, the dragons and their people. It's good. If anyone's like, oh, I don't want to read about the Napoleonic Wars, because I honestly don't know anything about it, really.
Other than something to do with Waterloo, and it's at Trafalgar Square in England. That's like the extent of my knowledge. Oh, and he took over Egypt. That's like all I know.
I think they do go to Africa in one of the books.
Oh.
Yeah. You should read it. I think you'd like them. They're pretty good. So yeah, do you have any historical fantasy books that you really like?
The only one I can think of is Life After Life.
I haven't heard of that.
That was really famous for a while. It's Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. But I think it's almost falls into the category of magical realism. And it's just about a woman who she lives her whole life in the 1940s, and then she dies, and she lives her whole life and like she starts all over again. She's like in an endless, almost like Groundhog Day, but it's your whole entire life. Like as soon as you die, you start all over again. But she doesn't quite remember that it's happening. And so like over time, she starts to realize it's happening. And she's like, you know what? This is a superpower. I'm going to use it to kill who? You guessed it, Hitler. And
oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. And I'll stop there.
I've never heard of that book. Interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty well received for like, I want to say like the 2015s, like that era. It was pretty well received during that time. I read it and it was good. It was so sad, but I liked it.
Yeah, maybe I'll check that out. Should we talk about dark fantasy?
Let's do it.
So I think that it's interesting because I was like, how do people classify dark fantasy? I'm like, I think I do like dark fantasy. I think grimdark is where it's too much for me. But because my understanding is of the difference, because I see these together a lot, and I'm curious like how you think about them. But dark fantasy is a lot more about like the vibe and like the setting, whereas grimdark includes the characters. So dark fantasy, I saw a comparison where it was like dark fantasy is kind of like dystopian sci-fi. Like it's like the world is not great and we want to fix the world, but it's not, but the characters themselves aren't twisted. Like the world is twisted, and they like a lot of times they want to like overcome the world, whereas grimdark, the characters are also twisted.
Yeah, I would also say like dark fantasy is an exploration into the grotesque. Like so it's not necessarily about people, just like Frankenstein, I think is such a good example of, this is from my English college days, but like, the sublime versus the grotesque. The sublime is everything beautiful in the world and like magical. And the grotesque is also magical, but it's the opposite of beautiful, but in its own way, it's still kind of
like
beautiful.
A twisted way.
Yes, exactly. And so I think dark fantasy is an exploration into that. Whereas grimdark, I think, is just like a violence. It's like the worst of humanity brought to the surface. So it's like more about human grotesqueness, I guess, rather than earthly grotesqueness.
Yeah, we talked about Bare Bones in the Midnight Soil last time, which I would classify as dark fantasy. I don't know that I would say it's grimdark, although the characters are a little twisted, but it still had like a feeling of hope. And like, I don't know, that one's interesting to classify. But I think like something like Ninth House, for example, you haven't read that one, have you? It's pretty dark. It's definitely dark. And like the magic itself is dark. But the main character, like you connect with her and like understand where she's coming from. And she's trying to be good and grow and evolve. And whereas I feel like something like, it's funny, when I was looking up Grimdark, I haven't read actually like any of the classic Grimdark books because I think I've like self-selected out of that. So I'm curious what other people think. But yeah, the ones I kept seeing listed was Game of Thrones, which I have not read. I also haven't seen the show, and The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, which I had on my to-read list because it's so many people have read it and said it's really good, and it is really good. But I didn't realize it's like it's a retelling of a war in China, I think.
Which one?
I don't remember. I haven't read it. But people said it can get pretty similar to Game of Thrones. It's like what you said, the worst of humanity. Like there's rape in it. There's a lot of darker things, which I'm glad I found. I found that out like 2 weeks ago. I was like, oh, I'm glad I know, because I think I would have been scarred if I picked it up. But it's supposed to be really, really good. But yeah, I think that's like the difference. It's like if you're going to pick up a Grimdark, like expect to be kind of horrified about what people can do.
Yeah, like to have that queasy feeling in your belly as you read a scene, then like you can't look away. So fun fact, I read the first 4 books of Game of Thrones and I watched the first season. And,
oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. We're obviously, if anyone's listening, we are obviously biased against Grimdark. So feel free to have your own opinion, but we just don't like it, Demi and I. But like at the Game of Thrones, like there was this one scene in particular that was just so graphic and so gratuitous in its graphic nature that I remember. So I had the book open and I just put it down, expecting to eventually come back to it. And I just never came back to it. And I got to a point where I'm like, why am I reading this? Like, it's not doing anything for me other than making me afraid of every man I've ever crossed paths with. Like, it's just not a book for me to read. I eventually just gave the books away. And I know a lot of my friends love that book. Actually, one of my friends, she was obsessed with that book years and years and years before the show ever came out. And like before he was even famous. And she was actually the one who told me about this book a long time ago. So, and she loved it. Her appetite can handle it. My appetite could not handle it. And so I think that could also be the case for dark fantasy too. Honestly, sometimes dark fantasy can get a little too dark. So it's just my personality. I think I like to stay in the epic fantasy side of things, like more of the grotesque and the sublime together, rather than, just the grotesque, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think like Grimdark, like if you think of something like Game of Thrones or even The Poppy War, which again, I haven't read, but they do seem to have what we were talking about with the epic fantasy, that kind of larger societal sweeping impact. Yeah. I haven't read the book, so I'm curious what people think about like the themes. Like if we look at Lord of the Rings and we're able to quote all of these scenes where it's like, no, there's still hope. We still got to go. Like we will triumph. Good will triumph. We got to keep going. In these books where it's like, bad. I guess, what do you walk away with when you read it?
I would say that Game of Thrones he meant for it to have hope. It's just that like, you're almost like, is it even worth it? Like that's the question I ask. Like, is this even a place worth saving? Like, is this even a place worth fighting for? If everyone is just so, like, humans are very complex. We could do very evil things to each other, or we could do very good things to each other. But it just like sometimes in the like gritty fantasy, the people you come across are the kinds of people who choose evil again and again. And so you start to be like, is this is it even worth it? Like, is the hope even worth it? Is this planet even, this universe even worth having hope for? I think a lot of people, if they're listening, would have really good arguments against this. And I could even hear some of the arguments in my head against what we're saying. So really, I think it just comes down to opinion, which is, I just don't want it. I don't want to read it. I think it's that based. I'm like trying to intellectualize why I don't want to read it, but I think I just don't want to read it.
I think it's interesting though, just to intellectualize a little bit more. Because to me, it's like kind of thinking about like different like philosophers. Like if you were reading, something like nihilism and you're like into that, or even like I don't know if you've read Metamorphosis by Kafka, where he becomes a bug. Like I read that book. And I was fully prepared to love it because I'd heard like all this discussions about it. And of course it's really well written. It's like great. But it's like horrifying because it's so depressing. It's kind of like what a lot of like, what is the point? So it's almost like kind of like, what is your worldview? And I think everyone has different worldviews And that's fine. We can all have different worldviews. That's why this exists for some people. But yeah, if you're like really into like if you read Metamorphosis and you're like, I love this, like I feel like grimdark maybe is your thing. Like I have a friend who who thinks a lot of bad things happen in the world and that like gives them hope. Like, well, I know that all like it's like almost like, well, I know any of this is possible. So this like makes me feel hopeful for my life. And I'm like, I am such the opposite.
I can't even follow the logic of that, but I believe that they can.
I know. And that's why I'm like, man, we are different people, but I love that for you. Go read the books that make you sob, that make you question humanity. And I cannot. So we just can't recommend books to each other because I'm like, I will be traumatized if I read anything you recommend. Yeah, I think it's really interesting thinking about that. And that's why there are all these subgenres, because there's like, all of these different things. And one thing that's interesting, so next on the list, we have magical realism. And I think that this directly is a part of this conversation because I first learned about magical realism in college. I took a class on, I think it was Latin American literature. And so what we learned in that class was that magical realism emerged from Latin America and like South America to kind of have a way to explore these really intense, dark themes and like these things that had happened, thinking about, like Colombia and like Pablo Escobar and all these cartels and stuff and different things like that. And so it emerged, and it took me like a while to get used to reading magical realism, because reading classic fantasy, it's like magic exists. We want to know why it exists, how it works, like who can use it, all of this stuff. But then in magical realism, it's just like I was reading examples of it, and there was one book, I think it was in 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I haven't read that book, but an example was like, so magical things happen and there's no explanation. People just accept it, like a kid being born with a pig's ear, for example. And they just live that way. Or there was like another book, I'm blanking on what the book was, but like someone is born and then they have like wings. And it's like they just are existing in our world, but they have that, but it's never like addressed in the way that it is for classic fantasy. And thinking about, it's almost like the inverse of grimdark, where it's like, hey, let's talk about all of the bad things that happen in the world and like just like face it. But we have magic and like that's a part of it. And then magical realism is like, well, we're gonna like the world can be too dark. So we're going to have like this magic here that we're not even going to like directly address and explain the way that you would in like other fantasy. Like it's just like part of it. Like Beloved by Toni Morrison is also magical realism. Have you read Beloved?
I read half of it in college and I never finished it, and I probably should because I thought it was really good. I think I just got overwhelmed with schoolwork.
Yeah. Well, it's also very intense because it's about slavery. And so, and part of the book is like, I don't want to spoil it, but like you read it and you're like, is something magical happening? Is it not? And like a lot of times in classic fantasy, we would kind of explore that and try to get an answer. But in Beloved, it's just like, you don't get the answer. It's just like, it is. And this is just how we're processing. It's never like, oh, this person was a witch or there was a ghost. Like, it's just like magic exists. And I think that that's like a really interesting way to kind of get at those like darker themes. Yeah.
Definitely. Some of my favorite books, I think, might be magical realism. One of them, I'm curious to see if you think this is magical realism. Life of Pi. If you remember that book.
Yeah, I saw the movie. I haven't read the book, actually. Yeah.
The book is beautiful. And it's kind of similar. In the end, you're not sure if it happened or not. I choose to believe it happened, which again, I think speaks to us. When you read it, I'm pretty sure you will also believe that it happened. But it's like, it's a book about a man or a young boy processing like, a shipwreck basically. And like what happened to his parent very early on, everyone dies because it's a shipwreck. And so he's left all alone. And so I think that magical realism is like I'm trying to think of the right word. But magical realism is another like down to earth way, I guess. Now, you know what? I have nothing to say. I'm just going to stop here.
It's like the opposite of down to earth. It's like so up in the air way to process things. That's like, I think when I read it, it took me a while again to get into it because I was like, I want to understand the magic because like I said, I want to like feel like I can have this magic. But in magical realism, it's like, there's no way. You don't get a letter from the school. You're not born like this, or you are, but it's not addressed in this. I don't know.
It's the opposite
it's hard
of world
to
building.
pin down.
Yeah, and it leaves you
exactly.
with this feeling. It leaves you with this feeling of this like funny feeling sometimes, like the magical realist books I've read. I can't really articulate what that feeling is, Demi. Can you articulate it for me?
Yeah, I feel like it's like thinking about like the suspension of disbelief. If high fantasy is like you have to like really suspend disbelief, it's almost like magical realism is like the ultimate suspension of disbelief because it's like, yeah, you're like born, someone could be born with wings and they're existing in our society and we're just like never going to address it. And it's like, but people would comment on this. Why is no one like, this is not realistic? Yeah, I feel like when I read books like that, it's like kind of like if I read some different types of classics, like I have to like have my brain stop trying to solve things and just experience it, and then I appreciate it. Like I don't know what that feeling would be, but just like truly removing like any sort of logical, like curious, predictive thing and just enjoy it. Yeah. So we have paranormal fantasy. How do you define paranormal fantasy?
I would say ghosts, ghouls, another G. Can you think gnomes? Gnomes. And then also like vampires. Also, I guess a low fantasy as well because it's set in our world, but it's like out of the normal. I'm just thinking of Supernatural, the TV show, as like a good example.
Yeah, I feel like paranormal is the one that's almost the hardest for me to define because I think that there's like thinking about like horror, because there's like paranormal horror, which is like ghosts and
House
stuff.
of Leaves. That's House of Leaves.
Yeah. Which is like still like different than how I hear people talk about paranormal fantasy. And that's where I'm like, does anyone know? Like, what's the official definition? But when I looked it up, it said like the definition I saw was like stories with like kind of classic magical creatures, vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters, witches, ghosts. So I thought that was interesting because I was like, I feel like this one's kind of hard to pin down because it is like low fantasy, but then it's also like urban fantasy, but it's different than like paranormal horror. And yeah, because I don't think that it has to be scary to be.
Yeah, like I put on here to the Twilight series is technically paranormal. There's werewolves and there's vampires. Like that's two that's two of the most famous ones. So like technically Twilight is a paranormal story.
Yeah. Well, even thinking about like Charmed, like that would definitely be paranormal fantasy. They have shapeshifters. They have all of that. Well, maybe we talk about urban fantasy a little bit because I think that that's related as well. Because in my mind, they're very similar. So the definition I saw for paranormal fantasy is like, these magical creatures. It doesn't have to be an urban setting, but then an urban fantasy is often paranormal fantasy within an urban setting. So it's even further niche down. Like Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo is one because there's ghosts in that. I think it's at Harvard. It's like at a university college town. And then the other example I kept seeing of urban fantasy is Jade City by Fonda Lee, which I have not read. But I think it's like the mafia with magic.
Ooh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
As someone who grew up in an urban world, like LA born and raised, I feel like I want to read more urban fantasy because I really like it, but I just don't come across it too often. So I want to read it. Maybe I'll put this on my list.
I think the book that I'm reading right now would be considered urban fantasy. I listed it under our sci-fi fantasy category. So it's called Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoka. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the name. But yeah, this book is actually set in LA. So I keep thinking about you.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's it. Made it to the top of the list.
Yeah. I'm like a quarter of the way through right now, I would say. And it's, well, just to talk about sci-fi fantasy. So this one's interesting because it has aliens. It also has a deal with the devil. This is like on the jacket cover and a trans main character, which I haven't read in fantasy before. So it's really, so far is really good. I love the characters and it has, sci-fi and fantasy and it's in LA. So there's so many references to like geography and I don't know. So I'm like, is this like, if I knew it, I don't know if it's like actual real places, or like sometimes in books, it's like it feels like it's real, but then it's like made up restaurants and things like that.
I will report back to you. I'll let you know.
Yeah. I think you'd really like it. So Yeah. So that's an example of urban fantasy. Maybe do you want to touch on portal fantasy for a second?
Yeah, I think portal fantasy, I think is pretty clear. It's usually like a world that we can enter into through our world. So it's like a little bit of both high fantasy and low fantasy, because there's that world building on one side and then our planet on the other side. I think the most famous example is Chronicles of Narnia. You go through a cabinet, something very magical about that when you're a little kid. Ideally, you go through a cabinet and end up in this winter wonderland. I recently started reading the books, and it's so good. I'll probably read it to my kids once they're older. And then another book that me and Demi both really like, that I think we've mentioned a couple times, is The 10,000 Doors of January. Even as an adult, there was something so magical about it, where there's just like these magical doors everywhere and they all lead to different worlds. So portal fantasies are always fun.
Yeah, I feel like portal fantasy is my favorite because I don't have to choose. It's like I can be like, oh, there's magic. I just have to step through a door or like a wardrobe, like whatever it is, like portal fantasy. I love portal fantasy. So I'm hoping to read some more portal fantasy soon. There was one I read recently, Water Moon. It was through a ramen shop in Tokyo. So you like think you're going to get ramen, and then if you're like, the magic is like, oh, actually, you need to go to this other secret magical place. I was like, that would be, when I first read that, I was like, oh my God, what if I'm like so hungry and I'm going and then it's like, no.
Yeah. Like, I didn't pay for this. I want ramen.
Yeah, exactly. But it was good. So yeah, I love portal fantasy. And then we have to, of course, talk about romantasy, which I did see a little bit of a discussion of. So romantasy is a category versus fantasy romance or romantic. I guess romantic fantasy is different than fantasy romance. I am not fluent enough in all of the genres.
No, neither am I.
Difference. Yeah. So, and we'll just talk to romantasy then. So in my mind, it's like books with a fantasy world, but where the plot is around the romance versus like those kind of epic things. Like, for example, Lord of the Rings, like I don't know. I feel like the thing you're wondering is, will they end up together versus some larger plot? Is that how you think about it? I haven't read a lot of like actual romantasy.
I've never actually read romantasy because I'm not big on romance novels in general. But you know what it reminds me of? Like in the television world, something that really drives me crazy with Netflix is they'll have like a sci-fi show, and the plot sounds fascinating, like it's a cool world. But then for some reason, like within a couple of episodes, they'll stop focusing on the world building and they'll just focus on the relationships. And so it ends up just becoming a drama in a sci-fi world, like a relationship drama or like a plot, like character-driven drama in the sci-fi world just happens to be the backdrop. And a good example is Upload, which I thought was so interesting. It's a show on Amazon Prime, I think, or Apple Plus, can't remember. But where they like when they die, they get their consciousness uploaded to like fantasy video game world, and then then it just stopped being about that world and like the complications and the politics of that, and ended up just being a romance between like a living woman and a dead man, which is fine. I think a lot of people love that show, but for me, I liked it. I said, I think you're seeing a theme here. I prefer to focus on the big picture. So I haven't really seen many romantasy. I did now when you said that, Demi, like books that have romance that are fantasy. I get it because I put Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson, which is his most romantic book. But romance is a part of the story. It's a huge part of the story, but it's not the story. There's like a lot more like plot around what's happening in the planet too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like a lot of fantasy has a romance subplot, which is different than like that being the major plot. So that's how I think about them. So if you want to read something where it's like, oh, I really want to focus on these characters and if they get together or not and how they manage their relationship, versus something like I just reread Aragon, like the Inheritance cycle books. And in that, like there is a romance subplot where you're like, will he get with the elf? I can't remember her name. And then his brother's plot is like his wife gets kidnapped. And so there's that love story, but it's still like the larger epic scale of, are they going to defeat Galbatorix? And like,
I guess like Twilight would be romantasy, huh? Since it's a romance happening within the backdrop of werewolves and vampires.
Yeah, I think that was before romantasy was a term. But yeah, I feel like that's definitely romance. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. And then we have science fiction fantasy, which we touched on, where it's like right in the middle of that spectrum. I like the way we've defined that. And then I guess like right to the left of that spectrum or to the right of that spectrum, however you want to look at it, would be steampunk fantasy.
Yeah, so I don't know a ton about this because I hear it a lot, and I'm always like, I don't know what that means, and so I can't speak to it. But it said the thing I saw was blends the vibes of the 19th century with fantasy elements, and often includes advanced technology.
So I'm a big fan of steampunk in general.
Okay.
Like I like the aesthetic. Like I think it's cool. You know, sometimes there's like these steampunk conventions. I don't go to them, but I like to watch people who go to them and see how they dress. Like, so I know what steampunk is. It is very
That's
much
like your like red carpet instead of like
yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, way more interesting than like a fancy gown for sure. And like it is like how do I say it? Like the steam engine usually plays a big role like in the stories. I think a really good example is The Time Machine by who wrote The Time Machine?
H.G. Wells?
Yes, H.G. Wells. Like that book is a very steampunk heavy book, and the movies too. I actually have a book in here. The Mistborn Era 2 by Brandon Sanderson is a total steampunk fantasy. So it's set. So the first 3 Mistborn books are set kind of like in medieval France, almost like the vibes of it. But like with an extreme evil person who enslaves a bunch of people. But like the setting is medieval France. Mistborn Era 2 is set 300 years after the events of the first 3 books. And it's after rapid technology advancement. So everyone has guns. There's like a lot of like gun, what is it called? You know, the standoffs like in the Wild Wild West. What is it called?
Oh, yeah. Like
where they like reach for their guns first and they're like, bam.
Yeah, you're like, draw.
Yes. Cowboy
duel?
Standoff duel. Yes, cowboy duels or something like that. And like there's like the steam engine powered train is like all the rage. Like in the railroad is in the middle of being built in the first book. And like there's a lot, it's like almost like I would even say like Wild Wild West elements too.
That's what I was just thinking. I was like, there's a Will Smith movie that has this, and it's called Wild Wild West.
Yes, and they have a song to accompany it too. It's with it's with the Owen
like
Wilson
on a
too,
train.
Right?
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, it's on like a steam engine. And because when you were talking, I was like, that's the vibe I'm getting. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, what's that Jackie Chan movie with Owen? That's what I was thinking. Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson. That movie, Shanghai Noon. Yeah, that's also a very steampunky film.
What about like The Mummy? I feel like that almost is like that movie.
Yeah. But with obviously also ancient Egyptian elements too. But like what steampunk meets ancient Egyptian, which is super cool. No wonder that movie was popular. That's actually a really cool idea when I say it out loud.
It's fantasy. It's like that movie is so good. That movie scares me. Like so, I'll watch it and then I have nightmares about the mummies.
Yeah, it was terrifying. It was a terrifying movie.
Okay, so that's lots of good vibes then.
Yeah.
Well, that makes the Mistborn Era 2 books. That sounds really interesting. Yeah, every time we talk, I'm like, okay, it's almost time. It's almost time.
I'll get there. I will get there.
So sword and sorcery, to me, when I think about this, it's kind of what it says. It's almost, Knights of the Round Table, like King Arthur kind of stuff. Like there's swords, but also there's like wizards. Like, although, would you consider Lord of the Rings sword and sorcery?
No, actually, I wouldn't. I would say that.
Does it need to be in our world?
Potentially, like I actually think Green Teeth by Molly O'Neill could fall into sword and sorcery.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think like there has to be swords. I also put Queen of the Tearling, which is a story I read a couple years ago. Is pretty good about like I feel like it has this sword and sorcery typically does have to have like medieval elements in my mind. Not that Lord of the Rings does it because it definitely does. I think you're right when you said like Arthurian vibes. Like knights, there has to be like some kind of knights involved, stuff like that.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I haven't read Queen of the Tearling. That sounds interesting.
It was good. I never finished the series, but I actually really liked the first book. But it's like about a queen who goes to like a woman who is like she's the rightful heir to the throne, but there's an evil witch like a witch queen that's oppressing the land, and she has to go get the land, like her country, back. Something like that. Like, and there are knights, there are swords, there's like castles. Castles also, I think, play a big role too in like sword and sorcery. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, so like the Dark Ages, both.
Yes, Dark Ages, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, so that's kind of leads into another category of fairy tale and mythological, because I feel like sometimes these fairy tale worlds are almost like that, but then like something like Circe, for example, would be like, that's more like mythological, or even like, yeah, we have like Percy Jackson books, you know, a lot of those. Because I feel like that's like a hard category, especially like Greek myth retellings and things like that, which is a huge subgenre. Like, so I love those books, but it's not, you know, it's not like, it's like, oh, this is low fantasy. It's like, this is a very much its own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like based off of like religious myths. And so same with books based on like ancient Egyptian mythology, the mummy being an example.
Yeah, but that's funny.
Yeah. I also have like another, like, you know, just to give different examples too, for mythology that isn't necessarily rooted in religion, like religious myths, is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. This book was so good, but I cried so hard at the end. But
I haven't read it. It's been on my list forever.
I recommend it. It's good. Just make sure you have tissues, but it is so good. It's about like a woman living in an oppressive society, but she's just very educated, and she wants to be like a researcher of dragons. Like she's just the biologist. She's an environmentalist. She's wealthy. She kind of is like Indiana Jones almost, but people don't want her to go out and be free. And she just bucks societal trends and goes and becomes like the world's foremost dragon expert, like dragon researcher. It's a really good book. But like,
sounds really good.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, maybe we should put that on the list for like next year. Like
we should.
Yeah.
And I never know where to put it, but I think like it's not a fairy tale, because fairy tale has a very different vibe.
Like, but yeah, like this, like mythology.
Yes, it's mythological. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And then we have our last one, Demi, which is new, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say this is probably like the most popular genre of the past few years, which is cozy fantasy. Like, I feel like it's like, I've seen so many like Substacks and articles that are just, and everyone's like, I want to read a cozy fantasy, which is, I think, speaks to the wanting to like not be in our world, but like, I don't want it to be too intense. Like, I don't want my heart to pound and to not be able to sleep because it's like so intense. But like, I want there to be magic. So
yes,
and it doesn't, and not, I don't necessarily want it to be romance either, which is like also different. Yeah.
So the way I understand cozy fantasy is extremely low stakes. I would say it's like almost like in anime, as I watch anime as well, there's like this subgenre called slice of life anime, where it's really just a look in a day of someone's life, and there's nothing too bad, too good, or too bad happening. It's very calm, very temperate. I would say that cozy fantasy is the slice of life genre of the fantasy world. Nothing is ever too awful or too good. It's just calm, like cottagey kind of. I started
like the cottage core, but of like fantasy novels.
Exactly. And I think the most famous one that everybody knows is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Have you heard of that one?
I have. I still haven't read it. I want to read it though. I think that was the one that was like, oh, cozy fantasy is like a thing. It like really brought it.
So I love it. So I've been reading it. It's just about an ogre woman who's tired of war, and she decides to open up a coffee shop. And it's about her journey opening up a coffee shop. And there's something so soothing about it. It is so soothing.
That sounds so cute. I didn't realize it was about that. That sounds very cozy because it's coffee. And I feel like so many people I know have like this daydream of starting either a coffee shop, a tea shop, or a bookstore. And everyone can live out their fantasy of opening a coffee shop, but in this fantasy world. Okay, yeah, I feel like I need to read this. Yeah.
Exactly. Literally, that is exactly what it is. It's I'm living out the fantasy of a coffee shop, but like, the world itself is very like World of Warcraft, like ogres, gnomes, humans, witches, sort like it's a very classic world, fantasy world. But really, yeah, just really nice.
Yeah. Oh, I want to read that because I feel I've read like TJ Klune, Under the Whispering Door. What's the other one? Oh, The House in the Cerulean Sea. I think those are considered cozy fantasy as well. And Under the Whispering Door has, I think it's a tea shop. So that's like part of it is like, okay, let's like think of somewhere where you want to go be inside with like a warm cup of something. Like I have my tea here, and like, yeah. And then you get the experience that you're creating, like your reading experience within the book. It's like, very,
yeah. It's very much like a calm place to be when, the world gets really hard. So it's a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Is there any other things you want to say about fantasy subgenres today?
Like you could get so deep in this, like a subgenre of a subgenre. And also there's so much overlap. Like so many books can go into multiple different genres. So it's really up to you and how you want to see things. And how you like, and your preferences. I feel like I learned about what I like actually from this conversation. Like now I'm like, I should probably look up more epic fantasies. Like I think I really like them. So whereas before I thought I was into the world building, and I am, but I am really into like existential storytelling. So I'm
But also it's funny when we're talking about cozy, I was like, it's almost the opposite of epic. Like you have like epic where it's like everything's at stake, and then cozy's like nothing's at stake, but you like both of those.
Yes. and not really anything in between.
Well, you have recommendations in literally every category. So I think everything in between also.
That's true. I'm just a consumer. I consume stories. Like I'm like I'll, you give me a story in any media form and I will take it. So that's true.
Yeah. Unless it's like depressing. And then
of course.
We don't want to read it.
But I already knew that about myself. How about you, Demi?
I think talking through this list, Portal fantasy, which I knew, like I love a portal fantasy. I would even consider Harry Potter portal fantasy in that it goes to like an alternate world within our world, and you can step through portals a lot, like diagonally, But yeah, portal fantasy, low fantasy. I like historical fantasy a lot too. But I also really like epic fantasy. I just have to be in a very specific mood for epic fantasy because it's normally multiple books in a series.
Yeah.
And
true.
Yeah. So don't always have time for that. But yeah, now I want to branch out and like get a sword and sorcery book. And, steampunk. You've inspired me to like look into steampunk because I do love The Mummy. So not that that's like all of those books are like that. But well, this was so fun. I'd love to hear everyone listening. If you have any genres you love or any other recommendations, definitely let us know in comments. And next time we will be talking about Upon a Starlit Tide by Kel Woods. And the author, she's actually going to be joining us. So it's going to be a really fun discussion. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them to us. We'll try to incorporate those as well. And that book, I think, is more of like the fairy tale mythology category of subgenre.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It should be a lot of fun. I think it'll be perfect for this time of year. And it's going to be a fun discussion. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we're actively working to record the next one. If you'd like more inspiration in the meantime, follow More Magic and the Little Ways on Substack, which we've linked to in the show notes below. Have a book you want us to discuss? Head over to moremagicpodcast.com and tell us what book we should read next. Until next time, happy reading, and we wish you more magic.